Cleveland Browns going through what y'all need to know to make some money on this team in 2021. Last year, 11-5, super good team. They had some really, really bad glaring holes in their defense that ended up costing them as they approached the end of the year, kept them away from the top tier teams in the AFC. But so much to be excited about if you're a Browns fan, and we're going to talk about it. This team's amazing, awesome. As far as my betting record on them, same thing, 17-6. You're making a lot of money if you bet with me on the Browns. I was on to how good they were and why very early into the season. The only thing that kept this record from being even better was the over-unders got a little bit wacky with the Browns. They had some crazy things happen in the red zone a lot of times in their games that would keep them from scoring as many points as they realistically should have. And they had an elite offense anyway, which is something we're going to talk about. Like this team. Yeah, so let's talk about the roster. Losses-wise, literally nothing on the offense side. I just didn't want the column to be blank. Defensively, there are definitely a lot of guys who played snaps here, but this front office did a great job of identifying who helped their team and who didn't so much this offseason. So the ones that matter, Sheldon Richardson, Larry Ogunjobi, two guys who started a lot of games in the interior. They were fine players. They're definitely NFL starter level guys, and I'm not going to pretend that they're not going to miss them. Now we'll talk about that position and if they're fine or not later, but neither of them are super highly impactful. Kevin Johnson and Terrence Mitchell, outside corners, kind of the same thing, actually. They're not quite to the same caliber, but two guys who give you a baseline of NFL play, but not much past that. They also lose, Olivier Vernon had a bad injury. He's okay for a while. Carl Joseph and Andrew Sandeo. So that's kind of the main thing. They had this team, the Browns, had the worst safety play in the entirety of the NFL last year. By pretty outside of maybe the Jaguars because of Andrew Wingard, but horrible. It literally cost them games, cost them the ability to blow out games they should have blown out even more. Really hurt, which they saw that, and especially Andrew Sandeo. Those guys are gone now. They can't hurt you no more if you're a Browns fan. Additions wise, again, nothing offensively. I just didn't want to blank. I think Grayson Knight was actually bouncing around the roster last year. Doesn't matter. Defensively though, all these names. These are dudes. We'll talk about them individually as we go position by position with the roster. But, Malik Jackson, Sheldon Day, two guys who are real interior players. Takk McKinley, a project, but I like him on this team. Troy Hill, John Johnson, two starters from the elite Rams secondary last year. And Anthony Walker, a starter on his own lead defense with the Colts. Super good job. This is the draft class. With rookies, we'll talk about how good they are once they actually get onto the field. Until then, I don't really think there's a whole lot of point in it. But here you go. So position by position, let's talk about this roster. The number in the top right, that's the total number of players at position I have ranked. So 74 quarterbacks. And the number to the right is where that player is out of that total. So Baker Mayfield, 16th quarterback out of 74. Baker Mayfield is pretty good. He is a guy who, when given a positive situation to work with, is going to produce positive results. He's a lot closer to the player he was through the entirety of last year and the end of his rookie season than he was in that year in between when he struggled a little bit. I'm very confident in that. He's a guy who, from a clean pocket, and again, with weapons who are going to win, will do his job, will do it generally pretty correctly. He has better ability with his legs than he's given credit for. And the types of mistakes and bad decisions he makes are not quite the same as other quarterbacks. So, yeah, and also, dude has a really underrated arm, too. He can do a lot of things, and overall, he's a positive quarterback to have on your team. Now, it is important to talk about his flaws, though, because as we go through this roster and you see how goddamn good it is, everything ties back to the quarterback. So when you ask yourself, where is this team going to struggle potentially, you need to know Baker. So his flaws still. The first one is that I'm still worried about him facing complicated high-end zone defenses in the NFL. Mostly that is speaking to the Ravens and Steelers. Now, I am fully aware, and this is an important note with this, that he beat the Steelers twice and hung 40-plus on the Ravens towards the end of last year. Things that I'm very impressed with, was not exactly expecting, and that have made me think about how good Baker Mayfield could be coming up, because a lot of times if a guy struggles with those, they struggle with those forever, because it says something about the way they mentally process his defenses. And he kind of got over that. Now the Steelers were in a really weird place by the time that the Browns played them in week 17 and in the first round of the playoffs. And the Ravens, he did it the second time. Don't forget that in week 2 of the season, I think they got beat 30-something to 3. So throughout his career, there's still things I'm worried about that. I'm not ready to say he's over struggling with those types of defenses. But him winning those games at the end of the year was definitely impressive. Yeah, and the reason is, right, Baker Mayfield is a guy, especially from a clean pocket, is going to get pretty risky with throws down the field. Now, it's not the same way that a guy like Mitch Trubisky or something like that does, because the chances Mitch Trubisky takes down the field, right, they just have like no chance of success. They're just horrible misunderstandings of what's happening, and they end up with either picks or right in the dirt or like that type of thing. With Baker Mayfield, that's not the case. He's a lot more like, oh, I can tell that this is like a 50-50 ball, or like this isn't necessarily going to work, but there's a chance if I throw it hard enough here, it's going to get through. Now, that means while you're still going to get some of the negative results, Baker Mayfield's going to be a turnover prone, specifically interceptions, turnover prone player his whole career. But those types of throws, those types of chances downfield can actually lead to positive results, especially with how goddamn hard Baker Mayfield throws the ball. It is a lot better than having these other goofy ass quarterbacks who will just throw picks for nothing. That being said, those turnovers do still exist. He's not crazy accurate. He's not a guy who, like I said, even out of a completely clean pocket is going to like murder you and rip you apart the way that the elite quarterbacks in the NFL will. He's just going to do his job pretty good. Well, like I said, he's a good runner. He's not amazing about it. And overall, he's not necessarily someone, if he was in a worse situation, I'd be super encouraged about. Not that, well, he'd still be fine, but that doesn't apply here. Like I said, Baker Mayfield more than good enough. But as a backup, Case Keenum, Case Keenum, not a long-term starter at all, obviously, at this point. But as far as a guy who could come in, again, to a really good like situation and give them enough quarterback play for them to be competitive offensively, you could do a whole lot worse than Case Keenum. And for this team, actually, I kind of like him. Still a backup for a reason, though. So now we're going to start a real big theme here of the positions we go through of everybody being elite. So this running back room, very, very clearly the best in football, not close. Nick Chubb is unbelievable. As far as I'm concerned, Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook are effectively tied for the best running back in football. Nick Chubb is right below them. He's the closest to him. He's the only guy who on a consistent basis can kind of challenge what they do as runners. He is crazy good. Every time he touches the ball, he is creating not just like 1, 2, 3 yards the way that some of these like other running backs, like bigger guys around the league do. He is creating 5 yards. He's creating 20 yards. He has the potential to create 80 yards on any play. And it's like frequent too. It's not just like, oh, he got lucky or, oh, he's depending on the defense to make mistakes for that to happen. He can literally do it himself. It's so good. He's unbelievably strong through contact. He's pretty goddamn fast. The way basically that I describe him is he's Dalvin Cook, but if Dalvin Cook has like 99 speed and 99 agility, Nick Chubb's is like 94. That's kind of the only difference between them, to be honest with you. Now, it looks a little bit different. Nick Chubb a little bit less finesse, more power, but whatever. The point is, he's really, really good. He actually has a lot of value from the running back position, which is something that's borderline impossible to do. And as a backup, you have Kareem Hunt, who's like the same damn player. Kareem Hunt is super reminiscent of Nick Chubb. As a guy who's constantly creating yards, he's like a functional NFL slot receiver now, which is not something you would have expected probably when he was a rookie on the Chiefs, but he definitely does it. He will actually beat not like good corners, but like mid corners in coverage. He is more than fast enough to take advantage of holes in defenses. He just creates yards and touchdowns. He's awesome. Why is he behind Nick Chubb? Well, Nick Chubb can make like 5 guys a play feel like completely miss him or fall off him. Kareem Hunt maybe maxes out at like 4, but regardless, 2 elite running backs who are very, very good. Depth-wise past that, obviously, you're going to get a lot worse. Dimitri Felton, a rookie that some people like, he kind of plays receiver too. We'll see about that. Dearness Johnson, John Kelly, 2 guys who have played snaps in the NFL and not been very good before. At receiver, another super good position. So, people forget how good Odell Beckham Jr. is, I think. Now, I have had issues for a while with Odell Beckham Jr. being like a top 5 receiver or super elite guy. I don't think that's the case at all, but he is definitely on the line and past it, I would argue, of being like a elite true number 1 and all that stuff. He's really, really, really good. And he missed all this almost all last year. And that definitely hurt this team. The way I'll describe him, he's kind of super Tyler Lockett in a lot of ways. I talk about Tyler Lockett a lot because I think he's one of the most unique and interesting cases in the NFL. And Odell Beckham Jr. compares in a lot of ways to him. Why is that? Well, they're both super, super fast, super, super quick. And if you give them like 6 seconds in a play, right, they're just going to be open down the field and there ain't goddamn thing you can do about it, pretty much. They also, however, share the kind of important distinction of, despite that wild athleticism, they're not all that good about getting separation in their initial route tree. Now, they're both definitely still above average, and Odell specifically is even better than that. He's still pretty good, but he's not quite the like Stephon Diggs that he maybe should be, a guy who's leaving the corners in the dust by 5 yards with his releases and like his first or second move in a route. That doesn't really happen all that often with him. It still does. Like, listen, he's still really, really good. But that's just kind of the only thing I think personally that keeps him away from the top tier receivers, the very top tier, is that he's not going to be this constant winner, ball mover up and down the field the way that some other receivers are. But whatever. That doesn't, he's still really good. Like I said, if you give him time, he's going to be open down the field. He has some of the best ball skills in the entirety of football. He is super fast. He's really, really good after the catch. There's a reason he's famous for taking slants to the house, because the dude knows what he's doing as a runner down the field, knows how to move to keep, moving into space further and further down the field. He does struggle with physicality a little bit too, I will say, but whatever. Odell Beckham Jr. is a really good player, and getting him back is a big deal. And then they have Jarvis Landry as their number 2, who complements Odell and fits this offense kind of perfectly. Jarvis Landry is awesome. He is one of the smartest receivers in the NFL. He constantly understands why and how defenses move so that he can put himself into spaces that are going to be open. He does it all the time. He's really, really good at it. He's not going to, like kill people down the field, but like he's a competent, 10 to 20 yard receiver for sure. He has pretty strong hands, maybe not like contested. He's not going to be like out here mossing people, but, in the way that some tight ends have like good hands when they're kind of feeling a guy on their back, he can do that. He's pretty underrated after the catch, actually. While he doesn't have the long speed to be super explosive, he very consistently creates 5 to 10 yards for himself as after the catch receiver. Like, Jarvis Landry is really good, and again, he fits this team perfectly. And then as your third receiver, you catch Rashard Higgins, who's awesome himself. He's a perfect example of like a modern NFL receiver, because while he's not super great after the catch, again, he's not going to be out here jumping over dudes to catch wild highlight touchdowns. He does the number one thing that is important in the NFL, which is he gets open. He gets open pretty goddamn consistently, and that includes like the intermediate to deep areas of the field. He's really, really good. He has pretty good hands. And as your third receiver, like you got some in Rashard Higgins. Rashard Higgins is very, very good. Depth-wise, you do obviously, again, with how good the top guys are, it gets a little bit worse. But Donovan Peoples-Jones, that ranking is a little bit harsh. He barely played last year, and when he did, he's a bigger body receiver, which normally concerns me because I think in the modern NFL, a lot of those guys just don't end up being very good because they can't separate. They're just not quick enough. I think like a Miles Boykin on the Ravens, something like that. Donovan Peoples-Jones, despite being that kind of that same size, doesn't really fall into that. Again, small sample size, but he was like out here if he was supposed to be open. He was kind of getting open. He obviously has the crazy highlight against the Bengals at the end of their second game. And he could be something, especially as your fourth receiver. Like, yeah, Kadarius Hodge too. His ceiling is nothing basically, but he can run routes in your offense and not suck, which is it's not useless. Anthony Schwartz is a rookie. Whatever, is he going to be good? I don't know, but he is extremely fast, which by itself is a skill that, especially in this offense, you're kind of that's something. So then we get to tight end, and hey, another bunch of starters. Austin Hooper as your tight end 1. So I think Austin Hooper is the perfect line for where tight ends go from like adding value themselves to just kind of being one of this big group of guys who's out there doing their job, but isn't actually different than anyone else or in that same group. So Austin Hooper, yeah, he's kind of the last guy that's actually doing things himself to add value to the offense. What is that? Well, dude has crazy strong hands a lot of times. Really, really good about securing catches very consistently. He reminds me a lot of Kendrick Bourne in that way, because I know he has a couple like bad highlight drops. but it's always like a concentration thing. It's not like, oh, he's having trouble with the defender bearing down on that type of stuff. Whatever. Austin Hooper's really good at that. He's an above average blocker for sure. He can actually run into space if he has it decently with the ball in his hands. A lot of these bigger tight ends, for whatever reason, it's a really big problem around the NFL. These tight ends are like super athletes, but for whatever reason, when they get touched, they fall over pretty much. A bunch of these guys just catch the ball, can't make anybody miss, just end up going down at first contact. Austin Hooper actually has a chance. He's fast enough and he has good enough balance for that to not be the case. So Austin Hooper's good. David Njoku is your backup. I'm very comfortable saying he's even better. David Njoku is goddamn good. He, as a player, so first thing I'm going to say, I think he's really underrated as a blocker. He's somebody who legitimately eliminates defenders at the second level a lot of times. He's not just an athlete for no reason. He can actually use his athleticism to get out into space and get in the way of safeties and linebackers and help your team a lot. And as a receiver, listen, the dude gets open. He's not amazing at it. But he's definitely good enough to, beat most linebackers that try to cover him across the middle of the field. He is really, really large, and he has the ability to make catches outside of his frame pretty well. While he doesn't have the consistent strong hands that Austin Hooper does, he kind of has the opposite where he can do the highlight reel stuff. He's kind of a threat down the field. He is a good enough athlete to add stuff after the catch. David Njoku is really good. I understand why he doesn't get the shine in this offense maybe that he should, because I know he's had personal problems with the front office and he has been injured quite a bit, but don't he's still good. He's your tight end too. And then number 3, Harrison Bryant. Harrison Bryant as a rookie last year more than proved that if he's on the field doing what you ask your tight end to normally do, he'll do it and do it pretty good. Now he's definitely in that group of tight ends I mentioned with Austin Hooper, where is he really different than the 15 guys around him or whatever? No, but that doesn't mean he's useless. Actually, it's kind of the opposite. That means you're getting a fairly useful player with him on the field. So you're great there. And then the best of them all, the offensive line. This offensive line is fucking nuts. Literally talking about 5 elite players. There's no other offensive line that even remotely approaches this outside of maybe the Buccaneers and the Patriots. But even then, they have a couple of positions that are closer to average or above average, as opposed to every single player being elite at their position. So yeah, this offensive line, you start a tackle, Jedrick Wills. Okay. I'm going to get this out of the way. Jedrick Wills, I will say, did have the easiest job a rookie tackle is effectively ever going to have last year. He played next to a bunch of other superstars. He played in a really good, smart offense, and he was asked to pretty much just put his head down and run block, which is something he was already very comfortable doing. That is not a knock on him, to be very clear. That is just what happened. In fact, I actually think it's kind of a benefit because even, really good tackles, a lot of them struggle as rookies. Jedrick Wills kind of got to skip that step because he still, by the end of the year, ended up being every bit as good as all the other, rookie tackles who had to go through their struggles at the beginning of the year. But he didn't have to do that. He just got to step in and do what the Browns asked him to do immediately and be very, very good. Yeah, he's a player who's dominant on his edge as a run blocker. He's a really good athlete. He does stuff like I mentioned about David Njoku, except for way better because he's an actual offensive lineman. And while he's a little bit lower than the other guys here because I would have concerns about him really pass setting against elite rushers, especially over a large number of attempts in a game. He plays with the Browns, so that's just not going to happen. So it's not even that big of a concern, but that is something that I would still be nervous about if it had to happen for whatever reason. Then at the other tackle, Jack Conklin is one of the most underrated players in football. That dude's awesome. He does the same thing as a run blocker where he's pretty much dominant. He kills people, especially at the point of attack. He is more than a good enough athlete and understands what he's doing in terms of, taking angles and getting in the way and actually eliminating safeties and linebackers. And as a pass protector, he's not super elite. And again, I would worry about him against, a Myles Garrett if Myles Garrett changed teams or something, but okay. And as opposed to other tackles where I'm oh shit, that's really bad. With Jack Conklin, it's more okay, yeah, he's going to lose some, but he's not going to get smoked. He's really, really valuable. As backups, Blake Hance did start a game at the end of last year and actually didn't psych. It was one game sample size. I'm not even going to bother making a conclusion. But you also have Chris Hubbard, a guy who's he's started at both tackle and guard for this team over the last couple of years and been pretty good. I would be very comfortable with him, even if it was for a full season, as long as everybody else was healthy coming into this offensive line and still being productive and good, which is as a backup lineman. You cannot ask for more than that. At guard, Joel Bitonio is wildly good. He is kind of Nick Chubb I talked about earlier. He is just right below the Quentin Nelson, Ali Marpet tier of super elite player. The only difference between those guys, he loses just a little bit more as far as getting off balance or kind of getting not thrown, but ran around right at the snap of the ball. He can do that a little bit more in those top guys, but we're talking single digit percentage levels. They're very, very close. He's a dude who kills people at the line of scrimmage, moves up and down very, very well, controls defensive linemen, is a super good player, and he can get a little wild in pass protection at times too, but it's nothing that's concerning. Joel Bitonio is awesome. And then Wyatt Teller. Wyatt Teller is one of the players that I wish I would have had this YouTube channel going into last year, because I would have told you how damn good he was. I wouldn't have said he was a top 10 guard in the NFL probably, but even when he's back on the Bills, when he first came to the Browns, I know he had some injury stuff and everything, but the dude just never fucks up, ever. He never loses. He always, every play, he does his job at an above average level, and he still has room for a little bit of the high end stuff that Joel Bitonio does, where he's single handedly, taking out two defenders, that type of thing. Wyatt Teller can still do that. It's not to the same extent, which is why he's a little bit lower. But yeah, Wyatt Teller's super valuable. Over the course of a season, you guys sticking the step in there and just do exactly what he's supposed to do at a level that's beyond what you expect. Every play is just, it's nuts. And then at center, J.C. Treader, really similar player to Joel Bitonio, actually. Just at center, he's not quite the athlete that the number one center, Frank right now or whatever, is in the NFL, which is what puts him a little bit lower, but whatever. The difference isn't even that meaningful, especially in this offense. He's a super good player. Again, he does all the same things basically Joel Bitonio does. And he doesn't fuck up. He's awesome. So, goddamn, when you talk about how this offense works, I mean, how does it not? This offense, right? Because you're talking about a team that starts with a super good, and this is not even including how good Kevin Stefanski is about running an offense and scheming an offense. So you talk about a super elite offensive line, the great run game, and a great scheme that already sets a super high standard for what you need to defend them, because you need this dominant front seven as a defense. Then you get into receivers that include Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, and Rashard Higgins, plus legitimately good tight ends. And again, smart use of play action, all that type of stuff. And then you have your quarterback, right? Baker Mayfield. Again, I don't think he's elite, but he has the single easiest job of any quarterback in the NFL for this year, and it's not close. And he's literally already proven that he can do it, and I'm not even concerned about him regress or whatever. That's just not going to happen. He's more than good enough to pilot this offense. And the only thing, like I said, is if you can get Baker to throw 3-4 picks because he's trying to do a bunch of dumb shit throwing into a tight zone coverage. But God, that's such an unbelievably high standard to reach to affect how good this offense is. It's nuts. So let's talk about the defense. This is what killed this team last year. Are they better? Yes. Let's go through why. So defensive tackle on the interior, you add Malik Jackson. So he's probably not actually going to start being more like a third down pass rusher, but whatever. He's a really good player who still has it. I talk about with pass rushers a lot of times. There's kind of two ways that guys affect quarterbacks. This is oversimplifying things, but you either are pushing the pocket, making offensive linemen, kind of fall back on themselves, getting half hands, reaching out to affect the quarterback, that type of shit, making the quarterback take steps to avoid you. Or you're winning at the line, at the snap, and forcing the quarterback to interact or deal with you coming free, as opposed to just taking a step to your left and then dealing with whatever else happens from there. Willie Jackson is in that second category, which is an interior defensive lineman. Barely exists around the NFL. It's super, super, super valuable. And he still does that. Now, it's not nearly the same frequency as what he used to. It's not 2017 Jaguars, Malik Jackson, or even, when he was back in the Broncos. I'm not going to say that. But when he just gets to play a role as a third down pass rusher, I'm very comfortable saying he's still got it and still going to be a really useful player. Then you have Jordan Elliott, the actual likely starter. He played okay snaps for this team last year. He was never super impressive, but he did do enough for me to be pretty comfortable and confident saying he's not going to suck. And if he has to, if he's starting for you, he's not going to be a reason your defense is bad, which, so you can't always have super elite players at every position. That's a really nice thing to have. At nose, so this defense kind of has two question marks, right? We'll get to the other one later. This is the first one. And having a question mark, it's not even that big of a question mark, at run-stopping nose tackle in 2021 is the most first world problem luxury concern you could have. So, Andrew Billings has played good snaps in the NFL before. He sat out or was injured all last year. even when he plays, he's not like somebody who provides a lot as far as like a penetrator or pass rush or anything, but whatever. He's played decent snaps as a big fat guy in the middle of the line before. You bring in Sheldon Day. That 70th kind of looks bad, but that's out of defensive tackles, not out of nose tackles. He's actually a player I like. He hasn't got enough snaps pretty much anywhere he's been with us. The Jaguars, the Colts, 49ers. Like, he always should have been playing more than he was. I understand the circumstances around why he wasn't, but he's a guy who, in the NFL, he can do his job. He can do it well. He can kind of get in the backfield a little bit. Like, he's an overall decent player. And then you have Tommy Togiai, a rookie who, listen, if you're going to get production out of a rookie, big, fat, run-stopping nose tackle is like the number one place where you can get it comfortably. So, they're chilling there. And then we talk about edge. Get the top one out of the way. Myles Garrett's by far the best edge in football. The dude is an absolute one-man wrecking crew, will dominate even the very, very best of tackles, like consistently, kills quarterbacks, is a borderline dominant edge defender too. Like, the dude is just wildly good. I don't even talk about much about Myles Garrett. Other than him, though, so they bring in Jadeveon Clowney. Now, I have issues with Jadeveon Clowney as like a number one pass rusher. I think that's kind of been exposed at this point. I'm not saying anything new, but he's definitely lacks a lot of that ability to be a guy who's going to kill the quarterback. But as your number two on this team specifically, I actually really like him because where his talent does shine through is as a run defender. He's an absolutely elite edge player as far as defending the run. That's where his talent that like made him the first overall pick, that made him the super hyped guy, really shows up. He is a killer with that. And as a pass rusher, well, he's not particularly good. It's not like he's a scrub. He's not nothing. And he kind of has the unique trait where if you try to throw some like backup tackle on Jadeveon Clowney, or you try to hide like the edge because of what's happening on the other side with Myles Garrett, you can't do it. He that's when he has those like flash games where he has like 4 sacks. He will beat bad tackles better than most guys around the NFL now. Is that like everybody beats bad tackles, right? But he does it way, way, way worse than everybody else. So that's kind of a unique thing to note about him too. Rotation wise, Porter Gustin is a decent player. He's more of a run defender, but he's an okay guy overall. Someone I'm very comfortable with in the rotation. You bring in Takk McKinley, a project, one of the least well-rounded players in football for sure, but if all you're asking him to do is be a true third down speed, like bend the edge outside pass rusher, he can do that. That's the one thing that he really can do. While he might be terrible at literally everything else on the football field, if your team is smart enough to identify what they're asking for him, which this team I would very much imagine is and isn't going to ask him to do more because he doesn't have to, then you got something in him, actually, I would argue. At linebacker, so this was a bad position for them last year for sure. Did they get better? Yeah. So first I'm going to start with Anthony Walker. Anthony Walker is a player I'm a pretty big fan of. So I use the concept, I said this earlier about Jordan Elliott. If you know he doesn't suck, I use that compliment to varying degrees. Anthony Walker is the example of the biggest that compliment gets to me. Anthony Walker, as a middle linebacker, he's kind of like Wyatt Teller, actually, on the other side. He just does not fuck up. He's mentally very, very smart. He's going to be in the right position. He's going to do his run fits correctly. He's not going to get smoked in coverage. He's going to do everything pretty well. And while some guys like have the brain for that, he actually has the athleticism to have that reach out all the way to the sidelines and like all the way across the field. Really, really useful player. While he's not like an elite cover guy or anything like that, for sure. He's not a disaster. He, again, like can understand his assignments and stuff like that. And yeah, just as a run defender, especially given what's in front of him as a run defense, like huge fan of that signing for them. Then their clear best second linebacker is Malcolm Smith. Now, this is the one where I don't know if they're actually going to understand that and play him. Now, they better. But Malcolm Smith is a veteran who's been in the NFL for a long time for really good reason. He knows what he's doing. He's going to, again, like do the correct thing when he's on the field. He actually, as a coverage player, is kind of underrated. He can do some things like as a zone instinctual guy. He's enough of an athlete, even at his age, to keep up with some of the non-elite tight ends. Like Malcolm Smith's pretty decent, and this team, I praise, is smart enough to understand that he should be starting. You have Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. He's a rookie. We'll see. Theoretically, he fits this team very well, offers them a skill set they do not have otherwise. Is that, in practices that can happen? I'm not going to say that yet, but that is something interesting. There are other linebackers that are relevant. So you got Mack Wilson, Jacob Phillips, Sione Takitaki, all guys who have played snaps over the last couple of years. Mack Wilson is not very good, but I will say his bad tendencies got really overexposed on this team last year because of how bad the safety play was behind him and how all or nothing the run defenders along their defensive line were outside of Myles Garrett. his tendency, because he's one of these guys who just over pursues stuff, who triggers really quickly, doesn't think, takes a lot of risks as far as flying up and down the field. That type of stuff, when you're surrounded by other guys who are doing the same thing, will make you look really bad sometimes. And that's what happened to Mack Wilson. Now, that's not a complete excuse because he was still like bad at it himself, kind of. But I will say there is at least a little bit of hope. If he was like your third linebacker around a much more disciplined defense, he can do some okay things. Jacob Phillips, effectively the same player, but he was a rookie, so rookie linebacker is not very good most of the time, so he has a lot more of an excuse. I'm a little bit more encouraged about what he could be in the future. Not that that's like a guarantee or anything, but he's maybe at least a little bit something. Sione Takitaki, while I think he's the best of these guys mentally as far as understanding what's happening in front of him, he's not a good athlete at all. He, despite being kind of big, is pretty weak with his play strength, and while he could do some okay things, it's like a backside walked up edge defender in a 5-man front, something very specific like that. It's pretty whatever. I'm not exactly a big fan of him. Cornerback. So this is the spot with the other big question. Because, well, here, this is the way I'm going to phrase this. I mentioned the Rams secondary earlier with the guys they brought in. Why was the Rams defense so good last year? So it starts with Aaron Donald for sure. But the other really main reason that frankly might have been more important is that they had 3 really good corners who, no matter the week, no matter the matchup, were going to provide good to really good coverage on like every receiving group in the NFL, which is a crazy luxury. This team, back to the Browns, is 2/3 of the way there. Denzel Ward is a absolute true number 1 corner. I'm a big fan of. Now, he's not the shutdown guy the way that the guys at the top, the Stephon Gilmore, Jalen Ramsey, those type of dudes. He's never going to be a guy who keeps the only receiver to like 0 for 0. He's too passive. He plays too far back. He's too reactive to what's happening. But he's also never going to be a guy who gives up 10 for 140 and 2. Like, okay, obviously that, but even 8 for 100 is really tough on him because he's such a good athlete and he's so smart and he's going to be right around the receiver no matter whose assignment is, like the whole entirety of the game, making their life really difficult, making them not be able to get open the way that they're very used to, which changes a lot of things. Denzel Ward is awesome. Then Troy Hill, the slot corner they're bringing over from the Rams. Yeah, he's a guy who does not get burned in coverage, who, despite being a little bit undersized, plays pretty tough, plays really well, sticks with guys, and is overall a really positive man coverage player that I like a lot. Now, he can run into trouble again. He is undersized. He can not be super physical at the catch point and not a good run defender, but whatever. You'll take a corner who's good. The number 2 corner spot, though, that is the issue. However, as opposed to other teams where I talk about question marks and it's kind of a code for like they're fucked at this position, that's not the case here. They do have 2 guys who theoretically are like really talented, right? Because you have Greedy Williams, a second-round pick a couple years ago at LSU, who's missed effectively his whole career with injury up to this point, but who was really, really highly thought of back when he was in college, and who, has the talent to be a true number 2 corner. And then Greg Newsome was a first-round pick just this year. Now, rookie corners are pretty hit or miss, mostly miss a lot of the time, but it's not impossible for them to play well. And again, with the pedigree and talent that comes with a first-round corner, combined with what you have in Greedy Williams potentially, like there's a real chance that they get like good play out of that position as opposed to just like, oh, maybe they can scrape something together. Which is also a possibility, right? So that's pretty encouraging. The only other guys worth talking about, MJ Stewart is an okay backup slot corner. He can play a little bit kind of oversized, worries me about some modern receivers, but whatever. And then Brian Allen, just a funny story, worst corner in the NFL, very comfortably. If you want to see something funny, watch him. I believe he was on the 49ers against the Dolphins, I believe, last year. Single-handedly lost them the game. I think gave 4 touchdowns in the first half. Unbelievably bad, but whatever. So at safety, like I mentioned, you go from the worst safety group in the NFL by quite a distance to pretty good one. Ronnie Harrison Jr. is the one I'll start with. He was a guy who got traded from the Jaguars to this team last year. He is fine. He doesn't really add anything to your defense. He's kind of one of those guys where, like, yeah, he's probably not going to suck too bad, but he's an okay box safety. He doesn't do a ton as far as really covering guys or really making plays, but whatever. You bring in John Johnson, though, from the Rams. John Johnson is awesome. He's a guy who's going to make consistent, significant impact at all 3, like deep as a deep safety, as a guy up in the box, as a guy who's covering guys in the intermediate area of the field. He's super good at all that. Really, really, really positive player who's going to do a bunch of positive things for this defense. And again, the stark contrast between when you have a position group going from like here to a player as good as John Johnson, it's wild. And then you have real depth here too. You have Sheldrick Wedwine, a guy who is a competent, true center fielding deep safety. He's not much good at anything else, but that is a valuable skill set. And then you have Grant Delpit, who's similar to Greedy Williams, is a second-round pick out of LSU, who was super highly thought of for a long time. That could be something good. And while you don't know, when you're talking about that level of talent or ability as your fourth safety, probably, like, you're doing all right. So this defense, while I don't think they really have the ceiling of being super elite, because there are still potentially two kind of holes in their coverage, and outside of Myles Garrett, it's not like their pass rush is amazing. That's fine, because remember, with how goddamn good this offense is, this defense just needs to keep up, or hinder teams from keeping up, and they're so far past good enough to do that. It's awesome, right? Because you have, as a run defense, again, maybe the best, true, hand-down edge defenders in the NFL, combined with linebackers who don't suck anymore. And again, John Johnson, guys who can play in the box. And then as a pass defense, you have Myles Garrett, who provides such a high floor of a pass rush anyway. You have other guys who are at least capable now, for sure. And potentially, you have an elite secondary. You at least, though, have a decent one. And so that number 2 corner spot, I think specifically, is what will determine if they're just a really, really good playoff team, or this team can very comfortably be the best team in the AFC next year. And I think it really comes down to that one spot. So when you look ahead of their schedule, right, offensively, you need to find teams that either have a front seven to keep up with them, or again, run that very complicated zone defense. And yeah, you do catch the Steelers, which I know they beat them last year again, but that matchup worries me a little bit. And the Ravens, it's kind of the same thing. But past those, goddamn, dude, the Vikings, they are going to be a lot better defensively. They have Mike Zimmer, a guy who fits into that category, really smart, but it's not terrifying. The Broncos and Bears have the front sevens a little bit, but not what you need for this team. Really the only team across the NFL that I'm would be worried about is the Buccaneers, which obviously you don't see on the schedule. Defensively, I'm still worried about this team against the high end of quarterback offenses. But again, you do catch the Chiefs week 1, and then you catch the Packers later in the season. But other than that, I don't know, you're probably fine. So this team is awesome. So good. And there's a ton of things to be, again, I think you're talking about, if they get good number 2 corner play, the best team in the AFC right here.